Welcome to my favorite chapter of the book of Tanya. This is a chapter that I've been learning this chapter for 30 years, I think. No, 22 years, probably 22, 23 years. And I've never yet finished it.
I never knew you were that slow.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That is what happens,
What sentence are you up to?
It's not a reading problem. I can read. I'm capable of reading. It's an application problem. Because life challenges me as life challenges you. And this chapter of Tanya is so transformational. It has already changed my life. And I'm excited to share it with you because I'm confident, in fact, I'm certain that it will change your life as well. This chapter is talking about how to change bad news into good news, how to make bad things into good results, how to transform things that happen to you into good, positive results. What the Tanya is telling us right now is that you are the fulcrum of existence. You are the fulcrum of existence. You are not merely a passive spectator in this game of life. You are a player on the field. Imagine a player in the World Cup soccer. Soccer is a game that the whole world plays. I mean, America's starting now, which is nice, but it's actually a game that the whole world plays. Look at Toby here. He's a huge fan, right?
Is it F-O-L-C-R-U-M?
F-U-L-C-R-U-M. Fulcrum.
It's like when you're trying to lift a heavy object, C-R-U-M.
In the game of soccer, which is a game that the whole world plays, unlike baseball, where the Americans call it the World Championships, I think they call it, right? There's two countries, the World Series. There's two countries in the world, I think, that play baseball, Japan and America. They call it the World Series. They wouldn't even qualify for an Olympic sport because I think you have to have a minimum of maybe half a dozen countries that play a sport in order for it to be introduced, to the Olympic Games. But no, I'm talking about soccer, football. Football, but they hold the ball with their hands. Explain this to me. Football, they hold the ball with their hands. I don't understand this. Soccer, you play soccer with your feet. Why do they call it football? They should call it handball. Whatever. Without getting into critique of American sports here, the game of soccer. Imagine you told the player, you said to the right wing or the striker. I used to play striker. No, I used to play right wing. I'm sorry, in the under 9 soccer league back in Johannesburg. Imagine you told the right wing that we don't know what's going to happen in this game. We don't know. You're going to have to wait and see. That's like the worst coach ever in the history of coaches saying that to his team. You got to tell the team the outcome of this game depends on you independently of each other. Each of you individually can and must change the outcome of this game. This is exactly what's going on in the game of life, where the Alter Rebbe is our coach. And he says, guys, wake up. You're not in the bleachers. You're not in the nosebleed section, looking at the game from 200 feet high in the sky. You're on the field. And you can and must change the outcome of the bad news, or as Elaine told me yesterday, the painful news that happens to you. How are you going to do that? What tools exactly do I have to transform the outcome of the CAT scan or the MRI or the, the medical procedure, or the outcome of the biopsy, the legal proceedings, the military escalation? What power do I have? Comes Alter Rebbe and he opens us up. He opens up the hood of our souls and he introduces us to the power that we harbor in our souls. What gadget do I have that I have no idea how to use? I have a gadget that I don't know how to use, I'm sure. My car. So I got a car that apparently I don't know how to use. It's got so many buttons and gadgets. Yeah, there's pieces in this car. Like, I don't know how to open the back door, for example. I'm serious. I don't know how to open the back. There's like a button you have to push. Whatever. It's a little embarrassing. Forgive me. But basically, I've got all these bells and whistles in my car, but I don't know how to use them. So what good does that do for me? Garnished. Nothing. It does me no good. I know, but I have no patience to learn my car. Seriously. I'd rather learn my child. Learn how to handle my child or my wife or myself than learn how to handle my car.
You're better off learning your wife.
Why not? Why not? You can learn your wife. Why not? Do you know the triggers of all your children?
Oh, a lot of them, yes.
Do you know your wife's triggers? Yeah, your wife's triggers. You know what they are?
What do you mean by trigger?
Oh, that's my answer. You don't know what a trigger is, right? Can you imagine? You see, so if you know a trigger is something which that when touched, when pulled, is going to cause, is going to cause some sort of a negative reaction, right? If you knew, do you know the triggers of all the 5 people that you are closest to? Think about that. So you know your car, but you know your best friend? Do you know your daughter? Think about it, right? Let me ask another question. Do you know your own triggers? And now my question is, do you know your own powers? Do you know your own powers? That's what the Alter Rebbe is telling us today. He's telling us as follows, that our brain is the most sophisticated computer known to mankind. Why? Because our brain actually emits energy waves that changes the world around us. Now, I know that sounds like sci-fi or something, but the brain waves that come out of our brain, and more specifically, the heart waves coming out of our heart, change the reality around us. This is what the Alter Rebbe says, and I would really love to do that in this original text today to finish this, okay? Stacy knows her kids' triggers, absolutely, but not her car. Okay, fine. So we're in a good place. This is great. By the way, just in case it sounds a little crazy, when the tribes of Reuven and Gad and half of Manasseh wanted to not enter the promised land, and they wanted to stay in the Transjordan, they wanted to stay in Syria, in the Jordan area over there, and not enter into the land of Israel, they said, first of all, we'll build huts for our cattle, and then we'll build homes for our wives and kids. Moses is like, guys, you got your priorities a little bit backwards, okay? First, you build for your wife and children, then you worry about the cattle, right? Very interesting observation there, right? You know, at a bris, at a Pidyon Ben. You know what a Pidyon Ben is? 30 days old. At the 30 days of life, when a firstborn child is born, and this firstborn child is not the son of a Levi or a Kohen, right? So the mother or father is not a Kohen or a Levi, an Israelite, and it's a firstborn child, not born by C-section, with no prior pregnancies. Then that firstborn child, firstborn boy, is subject to the Pidyon Haben ceremony, which is the redemption of the firstborn. Now, if you didn't have one when you were born, if you are a firstborn, and your parents are not a Kohen or a Levi, and your parents didn't have a C-section to you or a previous children born before you, then you probably need a Pidyon Haben. If you didn't have one, talk to me. We can arrange one for you. It's not too late. It's done on the 30th day of life, and at that 30th day of life, was it the 31st day of life? The Kohen is brought in, and the Kohen asks a question to the father. He says, do you want your child, or would you rather redeem your child for 5 silver shekels? Now, I'm very glad that you find that funny, sir. I'm glad. Very good. Very good. No, it's nice. Good. Because it sounds like an utterly absurd question. Do you want the baby, or do you want to keep the $5? Right? Sounds absurd. Now, at 30 days old, 31 days old, the kids are still cute. But how about if you ask you that question when the kid is 16? Or 26? I'll take 2 shekels, right? Right? But now listen to this. But I want to ask you this question. How often does it happen that the very same father that says, of course I want the baby, is spending more time in the office than with the child after hours? How often does it happen that the father, the mother, instead of spending time looking the child in the eye and listening to their stories and assuaging their anxieties and filling them with faith and hope, is too busy to sit around the Shabbos table and listen to their kids because they've got to be on their phone right now, right? Making another $1, $5, or $5,000, right? So the question, though funny initially, you're right, it's funny, is actually a very real question when we're older and we ask ourselves, so do you want to spend time with your kid, or do you want to spend some more time work? The cat's in the cradle, right? Remember that one?
Sure, that's a great song.
Right, that's what it's talking about. So I'm just saying that, it's nice to say that, well, let me tell you another story. So one more story, forgive me. This guy comes into the police station and he's very, very upset. Very, very upset. He says, I can't find my wife. Don't know what to do. Sir, tell us about your wife. How tall is she? She's like, I don't know, 5 feet, maybe 5.5, maybe 5'10". I don't know. What color hair does she have? He says mostly blonde. She might have dyed it recently. I can't remember exactly. Might be brown. Okay, fine. Color eyes, bluish, greenish, maybe brownish. Okay. Okay. And what was she wearing? I don't remember. I don't remember what she was wearing. Okay. And was she walking? Was she driving? She was driving. What was she driving? She was driving a BMW X Series with alloy tires and forgive me here, but 14 horsepower and all the bells and whistles that had the latest upgrade. It was diesel fuel, wasn't the other fuel. And then he bursts out crying. So the policeman looks at him and he says, "Don't worry, sir. We'll help you find your car." Okay,
Can I
so
ask you a question?
yes, sir.
We're still on page 4.
Yeah. This is all part of it. This is the introduction. This is the introduction. Yeah. So here we are, friends, and we're trying to figure out how many of us are familiar with our cars, but how familiar are you with managing your child or your wife or yourself, right? And that's what the Alter Rebbe today tells us in this Tanya, where he says your brain and your heart has the power to change the energy around you. Now, just to explain this, I think I touched on it recently, maybe yesterday, that if you think about it, everything around us and the world around us is made up of energy. Think about that. There's no such thing as, we see solid, liquid, and gas. But what is a solid, liquid, and gas? It just depends on the density of the particles. That's all it is. Under different temperatures, the water will become ice or become steam. It's just different stages. The heat or the cold influences the density of the particles. When they're very apart, then they're liquid. When they're very close together, then they're dense. But it doesn't mean that they're frozen solid. What it means is that they're still moving. The electrons are still moving within the atom. Everything that exists, we know, is made up of energy. Now, if it's made up of energy, then what happens when you think? Thinking is actually a thing. Right? Thinking is actually an exercise which you should be doing hopefully every day, right? And every day like deliberately. Thinking is not something which you just do in between speaking and doing. Thinking is actually the most human of exercises, because I don't believe that animals are able to are capable of deliberate thinking. I don't believe that they are.
What about paralysis by analysis?
Hang on, hold on a second. Let me finish my point, David. Let me develop this point. So thinking is an exercise that we have to be doing, and when we think, we actually, if you've done it recently, if you think about something deliberately, then what happens is that you actually come to amazing places. Typically, if you focus on a problem, what happens? You will come to a solution, right? Thinking about a problem will lead you to a solution, gives you an idea, like a burst of inspiration. It's called chachma. Sometimes, if you think deeply about something that you already understand, then it will give rise to a feeling within you. It's called das. Bina, comprehension, gives way to das, which is feeling. So if you think deeply before davening, before prayer, and you think for a few minutes about a godly concept, something you learned in Tanya, then it's actually going to firepower your whole prayer experience. It's going to make it alive. And instead of just reading words as in a recital, your davening is actually going to become an emotional experience, right? And then when you do that, instead of like shushing yourself that you shouldn't talk in davening because it's disrespectful, you'll realize that you don't want to talk in davening because you can't, because you're in the midst of an emotional experience. Right? It's like kind of like, think about how you talk to your wife for a moment, right? You talk to your wife. Do you talk to your wife out of duty, or do you talk to your wife out of pleasure? Right? So now, why would you not be checking your phone whilst you're talking to your wife? Think about this, right? If you're talking to your wife out of duty, out of obligation, then you can't wait to get to your phone. But if you're talking to your wife out of pleasure, then it's not like I can't wait to get on my phone. It's like I'm not even interested in my phone right now. I'm not looking for a distraction. I'm actually fully immersed and engaged in this intimate experience, which is a beautiful emotional intimacy that I'm experiencing right now, right? So the same thing is with prayer. Prayer could easily become a obligatory duty, like a recital. But if you think before, then what happens is, if you meditate, then what happens is that it comes alive, because it creates this beautiful energy within yourself. Alter Rebbe extends that from within ourselves to outside of ourselves. In the first part of Tanya, Likutei Amorim, in the 53 chapters of Tanya, specifically in the first 25 chapters or 18 chapters of Tanya, let's say 25 chapters of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe tells us that thinking deeply changes your insides. But here in this chapter, the Alter Rebbe says that thinking deeply changes your outside. Because everything in the world is made up of energy. What happens when you think deeply for several minutes or hours? You know what happens to you? You get tired. It actually makes you tired because it's an exertion of energy. You're actually putting out energy. Now, it's a very powerful energy. Think of it like a laser beam. A laser beam, what's the power of one thought? Not much. One single thought. Think about a polar bear right now. You thought about a polar bear? Good. What did that do? Nothing, right? Because you just thought about a polar bear. But imagine if you think about something, focused thoughts for a long time, just like the power of one photon of light. One photon of light is like nothing. You probably wouldn't even see it, I guess, with the naked eye. But you put a lot of photons in one direction, it can burn through steel. Same thing with thoughts. You focus thoughts in one direction, it will burn through problems. That's what the Alter Rebbe tells us today. It will burn through problems. This is the power that we wield. We have it inside of us, and it behooves us to be aware that if we focus our thoughts in the right direction, and that's the key here, the right direction, then we can transform our negative into positive, our bad news into good news. What were you saying over there?
Paralysis by analysis. I overthink, and I get anxiety, and so I'm just wondering. I kind of respectfully look at it from a different way. Maybe I'm looking at my thinking is the wrong way.
I think that anxiety is the problem. Now, if that's medically induced, then I'm not a doctor. I don't know how to deal with that. But if it's psychologically induced, in other words, if it's induced by a lack of faith, if anxiety is induced by a lack of faith, then I think that you have to meditate on faith and your belief. For example, the doctrine of perpetual creation, which is what we're in the middle of learning here, how God creates every single thing at every moment in time, and it causes the mitigation of fear, the mitigation of anxiety, and replacing it with trust and faith in God, then that would mitigate that anxiety and therefore mitigate the paralysis by analysis. But yes, paralysis by analysis is a real thing. And sometimes you need medication, sometimes you need a friend, sometimes you need a good rabbi to talk to. That's all of the above. Anyways, let's go further inside of the Tanya to understand how we apply this wisdom. So now we spoke about the power of thought. By the way, this is not an idea which is unique to the Tanya today. There's an entire genre of self-help books that talk about the power of positive thinking, right? And you've heard about The Secret. You've heard about what's his first name? Seligman?
Martin Seligman.
What book did he write that's very famous? Martin Seligman. Sounds very familiar.
Positive, yeah. He was one of the authors of Positive Organizational Scott.
Okay, so this is a whole school of thought, a whole genre that you think positive things will happen to you. And by the way, if you remember The Secret, the big movement of The Secret about 15, 20 years ago, that was about, the secret that many brilliant people in the history of the world knew that nobody else knew. And they were selling it in a little book for $20. You could find out the secret. And that was that if you think positive thoughts, then positive things will happen to you. I'm not sure if they called it karma. Yeah, exactly. Now, today, it's no big deal because everybody talks about it. But this book of Tanya was published in 1795, I think it was, right? 1795. Nobody was talking about this stuff. This is classic, ancient, timeless Jewish wisdom, which the Alter Rebbe brought to the world. And today, it's no big deal because everybody's doing it. So I just want you to know, this is not like hocus pocus kind of stuff. This is actual, clinical research on these things. In fact, I can prove it to you. There's the famous, what's that experiment called? There's the Pygmalion effect, right? The Pygmalion effect was when students of 3 categories were told,
they were smart,
falsely told that they were smart, average, or weak, and their performances were aligned with those predictions. So in other words, how they felt about themselves, how they believed about themselves is exactly how they performed. How could it be that 2 athletes with the same skill set, one performs above average and one performs average? It's interesting, right? So it's being proven. It's called the Pygmalion effect. Anyways, let's study this idea of how we apply this wisdom. Specifically, what the Alter Rebbe wants you to meditate upon is the doctrine of perpetual creation. The doctrine of perpetual creation is the doctrine that tells us that God creates every single thing in the universe at every single moment in time, and therefore God is present everywhere at all times. Now, what that means, therefore, is that the immediate consequence of that reflection is that there's no space for fear. There's no space for frustration. And there's no room for aggravation or sadness or anger. In fact, elsewhere the Torah tells us that somebody who is angry is akin to an idolater. Kol hakoyes ki'ilu oved avodah zara. Whoever is angry is considered as if he's worshiping idols. Now, why would the Talmud say something so absurd? It sounds absurd. It's a big deal. You lost your temper, so now I'm worshiping idols. The answer is that the only reason that you lost your temper, you lost your cool, is because you failed to reflect and remember that what just happened to you, what triggered you, was sent to you by God at this very moment. If you would have been fully conscious of that truth, that the one that cut you off, or the reason why you missed the plane, or the reason why that person said something to you, is because God wanted you to hear that, or to experience that, or to miss that, then, and remember, God is good. We talked about this yesterday. God is all-powerful, God is kind, and God cares, right? Those are the three foundational truths of our belief in God. All-powerful, not created by someone else, right? God is kind, and God cares about us. So with that foundation of who God is, it's impossible for us to ever be angry. And if you're angry, it means that you truly don't believe, or temporarily you don't believe. Now, with that approach, let's see what's going to happen. Let's go to the bottom of page 447, bottom of the first column. I'm about 7 lines up. We actually switched today to this version of the Tanya, which is a direct translation of the Tanya for the online viewers, but you can still follow in any version of the Tanya that you wish. Therefore, first of all, man ought to be happy and joyous at all times.
Where is this? Where are you?
There's a dot right next to the dot.
Therefore, first of all, man ought to be happy and joyous at all times and truly live by his faith in the Lord who animates him and is benignant. How do you say that word? Benignant?
Yeah, I've never heard that word.
And is, how about benevolent with him every moment? Right? Benignant with him every moment.
What does that mean?
It means kind. Have you ever noticed, I once met a Jew here in this community for the first time, and I asked him if he ever heard of Chabad before. He said, yeah. In his southern drawl, he was from Richmond. You know him, Larry. He said, yeah, southern drawl, right? He said, I don't know how to imitate his accent, but he said, yeah, they are, the Chabad is, they are the happy Jews. And I said to him, Larry, that's the most beautiful representation of what the Chabad is. The happy Jews. That's exactly. Chabad is not a denomination of Judaism. Chabad is not a temple or a movement. Chabad is a philosophy. It's a way of living. It's a mindset that infuses you with the awareness and the consciousness of God's presence at all times, everywhere, and therefore manifests in a state of happiness, right? Can you imagine living happy all the time? Isn't it amazing existence? You meet a child who's sad, and what do you say to them?
Why are you sad?
What's wrong, right? You meet an adult who's grinning ear to ear, and what do you say to them?
What's wrong with you?
What's wrong with you, right? Because a child's default is to be happy, and an adult's default is to be miserable, right? He's supposed to be miserable, and if you're happy, what's wrong with you? What are you smoking, man? What are you drinking, right? So that's not actually the default. It's just that as human beings, we're lacking in faith. Essentially, we have to find our faith. And until we find our faith, we're groping in misery. We're groping in insecurity. We're groping. We're in the darkness. But when we bring this consciousness to the forefront, it's then that we emerge happy. And that's what the Alter Rebbe just said. But he who is grieved and laments makes himself appear as if he has it somewhat bad, and is suffering and lacking some goodness. He is like a heretic, God forbid. Why is he a heretic? Because he doesn't believe that the good God, who is almighty and kind and cares, did this to him. That is why the Kabbalists strongly reject the trait of sadness.
What is a heretic?
Someone that doesn't believe in God. Very, very easy. So this is really something to reflect on. The faithful, however, is not indisposed by any afflictions whatever. The faithful, the true believer, nothing phases him. And with respect to all mundane matters, yes and no are all the same to him in a true equation. Whether he gets the deal or doesn't get the deal, whether the biopsy came out this way or that way, it's all good. I mean, this is a high level of living. Can you see why I've been struggling with this chapter for 22 years? Can you see?
That's a challenge.
I mean, what a way of living. I can read the words, yes, but to apply them, whoa. Whoa, right? Let's keep on going. But he to whom they are not the same, for the one who's holding his breath for the good news, because bad news is not an option, shows of himself that he is of the Erev Rav. You know what the Erev Rav is? Erev Rav is the mixed multitude. Erev Rav is the mixed multitude. These are the insincere converts who converted to Judaism when Moses led the Jewish people out of Egypt. You know, when you watch a game of football, you know, you have people that, you know, they're diehard fans, you know. You're Tottenham Hotspur, I think, right? No, oh, sorry, forgive me. I'm sorry. Something else. Arsenal, maybe. Arsenal, right? Okay, this guy over here, we have Harry Berger here, who supported the Chicago Cubs through 99 years of losing the World Series, right? 99 years. This is a guy who's loyal, right? Then you have people that say, I support the winning team.
Oh, so that's the Dolphin. The Dolphin fan.
Oh, is the Dolphin? We support the winning team. I'm reserving my right to see who I'm supporting. Whoever's winning, because I just want to feel good. That's the Erev Rav. The Erev Rav, they're not loyal. They're not true. So when I watch sports with my kids, which we have a competition, we try to figure out who's the lesser anti-Semite of the two teams. You know, it's Morocco against France. So we try to figure out.
That's very difficult.
Right, it's a tough one. You know, Argentina's doing well these days. You know, Brazil versus Russia. It's like very complicated. You know, trying to figure out who the worst anti-Semite is, and then we support the lesser anti-Semite. Okay, fine. So, but he to whom they are not the same shows himself that he is of the Erev Rav. He's insincere. He's a flip-flop. Right? He's not real. He's not real. He's fake. He's not real. He's fake. And loves himself to the extent of removing himself from under. Sorry, I missed the word. But he to whom they are not the same shows of himself that he's of the Erev Rav, who act but for themselves and loves himself to the extent of removing himself from under the hand of God and to live the life of heathens. Ooh, what's a heathen? A pagan?
Yeah, has no beliefs.
A heathen is somebody of no belief. A non-believer.
Pleasure. Just pure pleasure.
Can you imagine living life like that? Can you imagine living life with no faith at all? If somebody lives his life without any faith at all, I'm curious to know what you guys think about this. If somebody lives his life without faith at all, is it possible for him to be truly joyous? Or is he always waiting for the next shoe to drop? If life is like a game of Russian roulette, of randomness and chaos, I don't know. Are you able to ever truly be happy unless you're anesthetizing the insecurity? As a believer in God Almighty, God who is almighty, who is good and who cares, you know that I'm always in good hands. That's why a believer is happy. That's the reason why the believer is happy. Okay. Because of his self-love. He really only loves himself. He doesn't love anything else. That is why he desires the life of flesh and children and sustenance. For that is his good. It would have been better for him had he not been created, says Alter Rebbe. What a statement. The Alter Rebbe is telling us, my friends, that life is one epic test. Epic test. You know, the first Jew, Abraham, started off his career as a Jew with a major test. A major test. The Torah tells us, or hints at, the story of Abraham, that he was 75 years old, I think he was, when King Nimrod, the king of that time, who was a pagan king, he believed in idolatry. So he deified himself. He forced the people to worship him. So he wanted everyone to bow down to him. Now, Abraham refused to bow down to him. Why? Because Abraham believed in God. And he felt that it would be insulting to God to bow down to a human being. So Nimrod had him threatened to throw him into the burning fire. And he did. He threw him into the fire. And when Abraham miraculously survived that fire, that's really when Abraham began to influence the world. Remember, Abraham was called the Hebrew. Hebrew means different in Hebrew. The word Hebrew means different because Abraham was different than everybody else. They were pagans. He was a believer in one invisible God, monotheist. Abraham became the world's most influential person in the history of the world, influencing more people than anybody else in the history of the world. Why? Because he then, through that episode, through that test, successfully passing that test, he influenced the king himself to believe in one God, to believe in monotheism, and then the whole world began to believe in monotheism.
Wasn't he the one?
So life is a test. What?
Wasn't he the one who said he would sacrifice Isaac?
Yes, that was a different test of Abraham. Yeah, another test. Abraham actually had 10 tests, Mark. 10 tests he had. And why I'm saying this to you is because Abraham, the first Jew, maybe it's a good point that you raise. Abraham, the first Jew, has 10 tests. He's the first Jew. Right? Our nation is still in diapers, and we're being tested 10 times in one lifetime. These huge tests of offering his son up on the altar, jumping into the fire. What does that tell us about our lives? Our lives are a test where God is testing your reaction. And in case it's not clear to you, it was explicit in the Torah portion last week. And he tortured you, and he made you hungry. To test you. Lodas, to know. And he fed you the manna in the desert. To know that which is in your heart, will you serve God or not? That's it. The Torah tells us this straight up. Life is a test. God is testing your reaction. So when something bad happens to you, it's not because God is out for lunch, like you once asked me. It's not because God is out of control, like Harold Kushner says. Like God lost control, I mean. And it's not because God is being vindictive, but rather because God, who is good, is testing you to bring out the best in you, to find your true colors. Now, if you know that you're being tested, it helps a lot.
David asked for a test.
And he failed.
Didn't do so good.
Right. Let's talk about David's test for a moment, right? So David turns to God and he says to God Almighty, why is it that in the prayer that we say in the silent Amidah, we pray to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Why not to the God of Abraham as well? I mean, that's pretty humble for him to say. I want
David.
God of David. What did I say? What did I say? You pray to the God of David as well. In other words, he wanted to be to people to know of his generation that even our king David also is nothing but a humble servant before God. It's like, God, why don't we put that in? Right?
So
No, listen, we not say God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and God of the President of the United States of America. I mean, that would be nice. We make it more personal. Wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be personal if you realized, like, God of my father? Have you ever said God of my father? How about if you said that? God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob? Well, we do say God of our fathers, but whatever. Okay. Bottom line is, he asked this question. So God says to him, because they were tested and you were not tested. Really, says David, bring it on. Bring it on. Okay. Talmud says David falls into a deep sleep. When he wakes up, he's overcome with a desire to go hunting. So he goes to his rooftop with his bow and arrow. Unbeknownst to him, there is a bird that is not really a bird. It's really one of those, what are those fake birds called when you shoot clay? Skeets. It wasn't a skeet, but it was close to a skeet. It was the evil inclination, the Satan himself. Satan himself embodied in the form of a bird, so that David would follow this bird with his bow and arrow. And alas, as he fired his arrow, it hit not the bird, but it went straight through a teepee on another roof. This teepee was covering over a bathtub, which had a beautiful woman in it, and her name, Bathsheba. Bathsheba. David is awestruck. Like in the movies. He's awestruck, and he summons her to his palace, only to discover that she was ineligible. She was married to one of his generals. So David arranged for her to become a widow. And this was David's test. He didn't know at the time that he was being tested, but he failed. He failed the test because he should have overcome his urge, his inclination. He did marry her, by the way. She did become the mother of King Solomon. Now, I guess they were bashert, but it wasn't supposed to be that way, right? So, there's other ways of picking up a date, Pick up line, call an assassin, right? But so David fails the test. But guys, I want you to realize David is the king of Israel, my friends. Let's not minimize this. Elsewhere in our prayers, we say in the morning prayer, even before Adon Olam, we say these words. Oh my gosh, look at what the words that we say. May be a will, Lord my God and God of my fathers, to protect me this day and every day from insolent men and from impudence, from a wicked man and from an evil companion, from an evil neighbor and from an evil occurrence, from an evil eye, from a malicious tongue, from slander, from false testimony, from men's hate, from calumnious charges, from a natural death. See the Hebrew.
The book's upside down.
Let's see, where's this? Where is it? Sorry, hold on a second. Here, I'm sorry, I missed it in the translation. I read it before. May it be, O Lord my God of my fathers, to accustom us to study your Torah, to make us cleave to your commandments, do not bring us to sin, nor into transgression, or iniquity, or into temptation or scorn. Temptation. Don't test us. That's what we say every morning. Don't tempt us. Don't test us, God. That's what we ask God every single morning. We say, please don't test us yet. It's maybe an exercise of futility because God is testing us. Now don't put your eggs in one basket because you might not pass the test. Be careful. Be very careful. But at least if you know that you're being tested, at least if you're aware that you're being tested, it gives us the strength to endure. So imagine if you knew that the next encounter with your spouse that might trigger you is on camera and it's going to be broadcast on YouTube. How would you feel about it? You'd probably react differently. If you knew that there was a television crew, what was that couple called? Kate plus 8? Kate, John and Kate, something. There was like this reality show. They brought TV cameras into the house, right? Imagine you have TV cameras in your house. You think you're going to be eating breakfast a little bit differently? Probably. Not you, right? The Rebbe says that if the brothers of Joseph would have known, that their evil act of selling their brother as a slave was going to be recorded for posterity into the Torah, they would never have done it. Right. Think about that for a moment, right? If they knew that their actions were going to be recorded for posterity, they would have had the wherewithal. If they knew they were on camera, a candid camera, they would have reacted differently. Now, let me ask you this question.
But Joseph wouldn't have been as great as he was if he wasn't.
Fair enough. And that's all part of God's plan. But to your point, Rob asked the question. He says, well, who wouldn't? Rob asked the question, well, who wouldn't? So let me answer you like this. God asks who wouldn't. Sorry, Rob asks who wouldn't. I'll tell you who wouldn't. Yours truly. Us. Because we know that we are the final generation of exile, and we are the first generation of redemption. With the coming of Mashiach, just like we learn about the generation of Purim and how they reacted, and the generation of Hanukkah and how they reacted to the Greeks, and the generation of Moses and how they reacted to the spies' report and to the splitting of the Red Sea and to the manna and how they complained. There's going to be the study of the last generation. And that's us. We're going to learn about this. And we're going to say, and there was a war in Israel, and there was a Gulf War, and there was a 6-day war, and there was anti-Semitism, and there was AOC, and there was a squad, and there were Democrats, and there were Republicans. And yet, how did the Jewish community react? Well, there was some that reacted like this. Then there were others that reacted like that. Can you imagine the Yontif that's going to rise with the coming of Mashiach? Can you imagine the Megillah that's going to be written with the coming of Mashiach, the Megillah of the end of days? And it's going to tell the story of the Chabadniks who made the critical life-changing decision of turning down the 7 a.m. tea in order to come to morning minyan, right? They're going to talk about how they made a decision to walk away from the buffet to eat the kosher, how they made sure to be more sensitive to their spouses and their children, how they made a decision to study more Torah even though they didn't know what was flying, how they did what was right even though it wasn't popular. This is all on camera, my friend. You and I, we are on camera. And that's why when we are able to come to that awareness, when we can come to that consciousness, then we can learn from the error of the brothers of Joseph. We can learn from the error of King David. Like we learned in the Torah portion this week, It says about a generation in the days of Moses that it wasn't their fault that they reacted that way. Why, says Rashi? Why was it not their fault when Moses rebukes them? Because they had no one else to learn from. They had no prior precedent. But guess what happens to us? We have 3,500 years of prior precedent. So we can't say, well, I didn't know. No, you did know. And you can know. The question is if you were listening. So when we realize that we're being tested, when we realize that God is watching us and every bad thing that happens to us is just a test our reaction, then we'll react differently. I'm sorry I went so long over time, but in the final section of this class, what we're going to talk about is not only how you're being tested, that's one part of this, but the next part we're going to learn how your reaction, the purpose of the test is why? Is only to test your reaction. So the moment that you come out with the right answer, what's going to happen? There'll be no more need for the test. And since there'll be no more need for the test, therefore, what's going to happen? The test will go away. And you'll experience not hidden good, but revealed good. L'chaim.
Yasha Koach, I think.